There you go. All right. So here we are, Vine and Fig Tree. I have Kevin Craig again, and I'm Dan Langenberg. And yeah, this is Vine and Fig Tree with Kevin Craig. Kevin, I just wanted to start out by saying that I think, correct me if I'm wrong, that Vine and Fig Tree is really about a vision for a stateless society. And hopefully that one day we will be there, get there in the future. I know that sounds really utopian to a lot of people, but that's you and I both believe, I think that's where the future is eventually going, and for goodness sake. Um, and so I just find it interesting. A point about that is when you listen to the radio, you're never allowed that option in the dialogue. I feel like whenever I listen to the radio, it's either you can be a liberal Democrat or you can be a conservative Republican. And I guess there's this libertarian party out there, right? And you would call yourself a libertarian. But like you've said before, a consistent libertarian is an anarchist. But that position is really not allowed in the dialogue. I feel like it's not really allowed to be talked about. And any radio show host doesn't bring that up. Like you're not allowed to question the actual the legitimacy and existence of the system. And do you have any thoughts on that?
Well, I definitely think we've been trained to avoid that question about anarchism. And even using the word anarchism is kind of self-defeating because it just triggers people. It's a red flag. So what we need to focus on, I think, excuse me, we need to focus on something more positive. And the way Micah does that in Micah chapter 4, he talks about a day when we beat our swords into plowshares. Or to put it another way, we replace violence with service. That's the way Jesus puts it in Mark chapter 10. Don't be like the kings of the Gentiles. Don't be archists. He uses the Greek word there that we get our English word anarchist from. Don't be an anarchist, be a servant. And so it's helping people rather than hurting people, which that sounds simple. And you can build the whole philosophy of the state of society on that principle that we're here to serve other people rather than to rule over other people. But you're still going to get to the point where people who are hearing that message are going to realize, well, wait a minute. Are you saying we're not supposed to have any government at all? And you say, well, we're not supposed to have what political scientists call a monopoly of violence, which is what the state is. Government is a monopoly of violence. People who claim they have a monopoly on the right to hurt people and take their stuff, to tax them, to lock them in a cage, or to kill them. And we have to point to the manifest immorality of that. According to Christian principles, that's just wrong to steal from people or to hurt people. And we have to frame it, I think, a lot more energetically, more robustly, instead of saying we don't want a patriotic entity like the government, which everybody thinks is good. We have to say we have to put an end to the idea that some people, a small number of people, have the right to hurt the large number of people or to hurt them.
That's what's so frustrating about listening to these talking heads on the radio is they seem to never, I say never, but they rarely ever ask. They question those underlying presuppositional points about whether this thing should even exist tonight on moral grounds. And that's one thing have found so refreshing with the Vine and Fig Tree content is their approach. Your approach is from a biblical moral standpoint. You're questioning the system as it is, and so I really appreciate that perspective. The second point I wanted to make is it seems like people are driven by fear. Like it seems like society, the reason that they reject a stateless society is because of the driving emotion is fearfulness, and so they won't let go of this idea that they have to have this monopoly of violence to protect them, even though if they would just look at it objectively, they should see clearly that this is a murder machine and a stealing machine. And but they won't really like they still think that at the end of the day, they still have to have this monopoly of violence, the state, the government, to protect them from some boogeyman out there.
Well, I think the reaction is complicated. There are a number of people, there's 300 million Americans, and they all have different reasons for supporting the state or opposing its abolition. And so it's very complex. I'm not sure fear applies to all of them. For some people, it's covetousness. They want something that's going to give them free stuff. And so you can say they're afraid, they're fearful that they're going to lose their free stuff. Okay, I get that. But it's not always the case that someone fears that the government is going to protect them from something bad. I mean, that's a big one. I admit that. I'm just saying there may be other kinds of motivations. And you can say they all boil down to fear, okay, but I'm saying that depending on who you talk to, why do they want a state? What do they think that the state provides that voluntary cooperation, contracts, corporations, charities, churches, families, businesses, all these other arrangements of human beings can't provide? Why is it that only this group of people who have a monopoly on violence can be their savior? And that's really, I think that's important to realize that in the Bible, the vast majority of cases, verses where we have the word save or savior or salvation are talking about government functions, governments protecting us from foreign invasion or governments providing a peaceful, prosperous society. And that's a myth. It's not necessary to have an oligarchy, and all governments are oligarchies. Oligarchy is a small group of people who have the right to rule the vast majority. All governments are a small group of people ruling over the vast majority. We don't need that. We can, through cooperation, through contracts instead of through force, arrange a society that's prosperous. And that's the message of capitalism. Those who call themselves capitalists and defend capitalism, like Murray Rothbard or George Reisman or others like that, they have shown how the laws of economics bring about a peaceful and prosperous society as long as we reject violence. If we reject violence, we'll have a safe and secure society and a prosperous one. So you get more free stuff, you get more stuff through capitalism than you do through oligarchy, whether it's socialist, fascist, democratic oligarchy. I mean, what we have, people think we have a democracy now, but what we have is an oligarchy. We have 1% ruling the 99%. And you can say, well, I voted for the 1%, or I voted a ballot box for a government, or I voted for at the store, I vote to buy stuff that's produced by the wealthy 1%, but it's 1% of the people who are ruling 99%. That's an oligarchy.
Yeah.
And you don't need that.
Who was it? Was it Albert J. Nock that basically split people up into two types of people, an economic man and a political man?
Nock, yes. And Nock originally got that from a German sociologist named Franz Oppenheimer. He had a book called The State from a sociological perspective. And the history of the state is conquest. That's how the state always emerges, because the state is a monopoly of violence. And every political scientist in every university on planet Earth will agree that's the basic essential definition of the state, a monopoly of violence, a
Well,
group of people who have that monopoly.
those
And yeah, that's the political. The political means two ways of getting what you want. Either you serve other people and then trade, or you conquer other people and steal. So Franz Oppenheimer said, economic man serves other people, political man takes from other people, conquers, conquests, steals.
and that would really fit in with what you said earlier about what Jesus said in Mark 10:42 and through 45. Jesus saying that don't be like the Archists, and you know how they exercise authority over their people, through, implying that they're ruling through this coercion and force. They're Archists. Rather be not like the Archist, essentially an anarchist, but he defines it as a servant, as someone who's serving others. It sounds a lot like the free market to me.
Yeah, it is. And you could combine Jesus and Nock and Oppenheimer to basically say, don't be political man, be economic man. That's the
Yeah,
mandate. That's the
that,
mandate.
that dichotomy is so helpful. I mean, just seeing that as a black and white thing is tremendously helpful. What about those people though who like they look at economic man and they kind of accuse the economic man, and it can be right that the economic man can couple up with political man in order to achieve economic purposes or things like that. There is a marriage sometimes of those two entities, but can you speak to that a little bit?
Give me a specific example of an economic man partnering with a political man.
Well, I mean, I just listened to something, I think it was yesterday or this morning, about some people will say, like, even accuse Elon Musk of partnering with the government, let's say, with, NASA and stuff like that. And so that he's receiving some kind of benefit from the government. But mostly he's an economic man. I mean, that seems pretty obvious. And I guess like there's other ones that get accused of, I guess, would be like Rockefeller, maybe, and Carnegie and Morgan Stanley and these kinds of men who were considered the robber barons. I don't know.
Well, that's a problem with people like Rockefeller and the so-called robber barons, because in many ways they did benefit people. I mean, Rockefeller dropped the price of important, like kerosene, fuel. I mean, Rockefeller dropped the price. When you drop the price of a product, you're serving the consumers.
Right.
Now, there is a question of what degree of state sponsorship or use of conquest, the use of hurting people, did they employ to do what they did to get rich. But that's complicated because legitimately they did benefit a lot of people by driving the prices of things down and making them more plentifully available. So I would say once you ask the government to hurt people in order to benefit you, you have become
Yeah.
political man.
Right.
You it's just you cross that boundary and now you're not being economic man anymore.
So economic man is not totally absolved of all like responsibilities. He's still bound by God's law to serve others, and he can cross that line and become political, right?
Anytime he asks those who bear arms to hurt someone in order to give him a personal advantage, he's become political man. If you ask the government, I want you to hurt these people or threaten them to make them do what I want them to do, you're not serving them, you're conquering them, and you're using the government as an instrument of conquest.
Which can be in the form of a rule or regulation that you're kind of helping create some kind of protectionist thing around your company, right?
Right. Or a subsidy. It can be a rule that hurts your competitor, or it can be a subsidy that comes at the expense of your competitor because you're asking the government to steal from your competitor and give the money to you so you can have an advantage. But
Right.
it's always asking the government to hurt people.
Okay, so this society that you're kind of outlining for us is the vine and fig tree vision that you have talked about, and you've spent over 2,000 web pages talking about the vine and fig tree worldview, essentially. And you also mentioned how it was kind of the prevalent saying in early America, right? It was one of Washington's most spoken statements through his journals and stuff like that, in order to express this like freedom, essentially, people being able to dwell freely from fear and from tyrants and being able to live freely, right? And so, I guess, can you talk more about what does vine and fig tree represent?
Well, to get back to the beginning, it comes from Micah chapter 4, where he talks about a day we beat our swords into plowshares, and everyone dwells peacefully under his own vine and fig tree. And that vine and fig tree combination is found, I don't know, a couple dozen places in Scripture, where it just kind of conveys the idea of people owning their own property and being free and secure from pirates and princes and anyone who would hurt them. So that's the basic idea. I think when you beat swords into plowshares, you're talking about moving from oligarchy, socialism, and fascism over to capitalism, or if you like, free market. You're going from compulsion to cooperation.
So, like, can we rewind? I had wanted in this episode to kind of rewind a little bit, and even before Vine and Fig Tree, I wanted to get to you personally. Would you mind just telling us more about who you are, and then we'll eventually get to how Vine and Fig Tree came about. But for the sake of having it, so that we can know in the future, can you talk to our audience more about who you are and where you grew up, and then we'll get into your education a little bit?
Well, I grew up in Southern California, and my education was irrelevant, basically. I lived in a Christian home, so that was important. My parents taught me that I could believe the Bible. My parents were from the Ozarks. When they came out to California, they wanted to get away from the holy rollers, the crazy Pentecostals in the hillbilly land, and they joined a liberal Presbyterian church. And in Sunday school, liberal Presbyterians teach the kids that, there's no miracles, that, for example, when Moses and the Israelites crossed the Red Sea, that wasn't really a miracle. That was just an east wind dried up a swamp. That's the kind of thing. They naturalize the Bible. But my mother, when we were going home from church, she would sort of deprogram us. We would tell her what they were saying in Sunday school, and she would say, no, no, you can believe the Bible. That really was a miracle. And so I was taught from an early age, you can believe the Bible. That was pretty important for me. Education, I was homeschooled to the extent that my mother taught in California public schools for over 30 years. And that's where I think my most essential education took place, was in the home. But, I had to go to school. I went to public schools all my life. But that was irrelevant. And I went to college, but that was irrelevant. I recycled. In high school, I had a really good teacher in speech and debate. And that was fun for me. Speech and debate was a big thing. We went to tournaments and things like that, all across, outside of our own little neighborhood. But like we'd go up to Stanford University for a debate tournament, that kind of thing. That was a lot
You,
of fun.
you were also in band, right? Can you tell that little story? I like that story, and I'd like to have it of your classmates wanting to help you out so that you could be a part of the.
Really? You want that story on this video?
I think it's great, man.
Oh, well, okay. It's fun. But like I say, we had debate tournaments that we would go to, and they were usually 3-day things. They would be kind of a Friday, Saturday, Sunday type of thing, and we'd have to raise funds to get hotel money and stuff like that, transportation, everything. But it was a lot of fun. Debate was my number one subject in school. So, but one time, I was also in band, and um, there was a competition where if we won the competition on the halftime competition, we do our halftime football show, and bands competed against each other to see who did the best job on their halftime show. And if we won on, I think it was a Tuesday night, I could be wrong. If we won on Tuesday night, then we would be able to come back on a Thursday or Friday night, a Thursday night, I guess it was, to compete against larger schools. We were a pretty small school, maybe 1,000 people in my class, but we would be able to, if we won the competition, come back and compete against larger schools who had 2,000 to 5,000 students in their class. So we won the competition, the band competition. Unfortunately, I'd already scheduled a debate tournament, and we were flying up. No, we were driving up on Thursday so we could be ready for the tournament on Friday. I think it was actually at Stanford that I mentioned before. And the band was upset, annoyed, something that I wouldn't be able to participate against the larger schools. So they passed the hat and raised enough money to fly me up on the morning of the debate tournament so that I could be there for Thursday night to compete in the band competition. But I never went anywhere with the trumpet, and I never went anywhere with debate either. So both of those were dead ends, actually.
But you're
But
really good
it's a fun story.
you're really good at debate. Like I've seen you in some public forums, and you're very well articulated. You said you had a really good debate instructor, and so can you just talk about how that was valuable to your life a little bit?
There were two different kinds of debate in high school and college back in those days, which I guess is the 1970s, early 1970s. One was a debate where you really try to analyze the issues and be persuasive, and we learned terms like ethos and pathos, and learn about credibility and things like that. In other words, my high school debate teacher taught us about ethics in the realm of debate. Another form of debate was what we called spread debate, where you simply throw out as many arguments as you can, even if the arguments are not valid, even if they're not persuasive. You just throw out as many arguments as you can, and you talk as fast as you can, and ordinary people can't even understand what you're saying. But in the debate world, this little niche world, the debate coaches and the debaters who judged other debates understood all the terms, understood all the shorthand, and it was just a mess. It didn't really make you a flourishing person and able to talk to people and make ethically valid arguments and persuade and reach a larger dimension of the person than simply the mind that's trying to take down notes on everything that's being said. It was crazy. But we had a good teacher who was, I think, a holistic debater. I mean, taught holistic debate rather than what we called spread debate, which was just spreading as many arguments out there as you possibly can. And the one who answered the most arguments or had something to say about them, even if they weren't really good answers, but just talked about something, I don't know. It was not good, in my opinion, and in my debate coach's opinion. So that was helpful, I think.
Yeah, it seems really important to remember ethics when you're debating because I've heard this idea, don't try to win the argument, try to win the man.
Right.
And so
Right. And you do
what
that
what good
with
is it if
good
you
arguments.
what's that?
You do that with good arguments, not lots of arguments. I think
Right.
that's what we were trying to say is try to find the good argument, not just throw out lots of arguments. Bury them. Bury your competition with lots of arguments, even if they're not very good, even if they're not well developed, even if you don't pay any attention at all to, I mean, the spread debater would sound like a robot, just one after another, machine gun, throwing out
Yeah.
all these arguments. And
Right.
you weren't talking to the humanity of your opponent.
Right. One of the exciting things about debate is being able to debate something, argue for something from a moral perspective. If um, essentially going back to real ethics in the Bible to make a persuasive, convicting argument to your audience. Did you ever have to argue for the other side on things you disagreed with? Is that a part of debate? And is that
Oh
hard?
yeah, that's the part of debate is you have to argue both sides.
Is that
And
hard?
sometimes, well, yeah, no, and it's an intellectual thing. You just have to kind of divorce yourself from what you really believe and try to argue the other side as best you can.
Yeah.
But that's a good exercise because it helps you understand how other people are thinking. In
Yeah.
order, if you really understand another person's argument, you could make that person's argument for them, and that person would say, "That's a pretty good reflection of what I believe." But if you try to argue somebody else's position and the other guy says, "Well, that's not what I believe," then you didn't do a good job representing that person. Maybe you didn't understand what that person was saying yourself.
Yeah.
So it's good to be able to argue both sides.
I wish I had some more experience with all of that growing up. I went to a Christian high school, but we didn't have a debate class, I don't think. So I think that would have been beneficial.
I
Uh,
think it's highly beneficial. I think it's really good. And in a way, when I combine what my mother taught me about the Bible with what my debate coach taught me about argumentation, I think that was like a high school or college level of apologetics. Because what you're trying to do is you're trying to reach people on moral grounds and not just on intellectual grounds. And that's when you're talking about moral issues, you're really doing apologetics. You're trying to defend your worldview, the Christian worldview. So that was good.
okay, so let's get into your education a little more. So after high school, you went to USC.
Yeah,
Okay, and then that was a 4-year university. And what did
right.
you major in?
Political science.
Okay, and then what did you do after that?
After college,
Yeah.
the first job I had was teaching at a small Christian school, and that was when I had gotten connected with Rushdoony.
Okay.
So before I graduated from college, I had already published through Chalcedon my first article for Rushdoony, and I was involved with Rushdoony people and the school,
Oh,
Rushdoony
okay.
school,
Did you
and
say before high school was out?
no, no, before college.
Oh, so you at USC, you had heard of Rushdoony.
Oh yeah, I didn't want to go to college at all. My father made me go to college. I mean, to put not a fine point on it, but I didn't want to go to college. I thought in my mind I wanted to be the next Rushdoony, if you catch my drift. That's what I aspired to do. So I was already studying Rushdoony and didn't want to go to college. In college, literally, I recycled speeches that I did in high school. I mean, I did lots of not just debate, but speeches they have different speech events, different kinds of speaking events in high school. And I took some speeches that I wrote and I recycled them as papers for college. I mean, I wanted to get my C grade and get out of it as soon as I could. And that's what Rushdoony said. He said, don't make a scene, don't try to convert your professor, just get your union card. That's the phrase Rushdoony used. Get your union card and get out of there.
Yeah, right. So, when did you first come upon Rushdoony? Like, wasn't it Gabriel Wrench's dad that introduced you to him? Had you already heard of Rushdoony before that? Can you tell the story about how you came upon learning about Reconstruction and Rushdoony?
I can't remember exactly when. I'm very vague on the years when this happened. But at some point in time, my mother met another teacher at the school where she taught, public school, who was a member of a church in Fullerton, California called Evangelical Free. This church would eventually be pastored by Chuck Swindoll, who was a pretty famous speaker and author. So, but before Swindoll was there, it was just a good evangelical Bible believing type church. Pre-mill, but good on the Bible. And my mother's colleague at school, her daughter, was in this church, and the Sunday school class was making everybody memorize scripture verses. So my mother's colleague told my mother about this, and my mother said, "Well, I want to get over there." So they started. My mother, at least, was making me go to the Sunday school class at E Free and memorizing scripture. So at that point, somehow in that venue, I learned about a big Christian bookstore that was in closer to Los Angeles, where there were lots of Reformed books. And so I started going there. I started buying books. And yeah, I met Gabe Wrench's dad, Mike, at this bookstore. He was a salesman, and they were not just salesmen, they were sort of evangelists. They were trying to get people into Reformed thinking. And so he based on some of the books, and E-Free is relatively Calvinist. I mean, more or less, sort of. And so they would recommend some books, and I'd go down to this big bookstore where they were discounted prices, and I'd buy some of these books. And based on some of my purchases, the Mike Wrench said, "You should buy this book." And eventually he said, "Have you ever heard of Rushdoony?" And then he got me buying Rushdoony books. And so that's sort of how I got into Rushdoony, was through an evangelist slash salesman at the Christian Discount Book Center in LA.
That's awesome.
So then, and then he had a Bible study at his home in Fullerton, which he invited me to eventually. And occasionally at this Bible study in his home, we'd have people like David Chilton and Rushdoony. And Rushdoony also did some other speaking events in Orange County. So, for example, he spoke on Sunday morning in Los Angeles in Westwood at a chapel that was a few blocks away from UCLA. And then he would come down in the evening and do another presentation, a lecture, kind of a service, I guess you would call it, in Orange County. So Friday nights, I would be at a Bible study in Mike Wrench, and Sunday evenings, I would be at a place in Orange County on the Cal State Fullerton campus where Rushdoony was speaking. And eventually I started going down to Rushdoony's events on Sunday morning in Westwood, where he was speaking. He, for example, he would give the content of his next book, like Institutes of Biblical Law. And the congregation, he would open it up for question and answers. A congregation would ask questions. I would help him shape some of the content, and then the book would come out later. So I would, on occasion, be able to drive down to Westwood and check that out. So I started getting involved in Rushdoony. I guess that's in high school, late years of high school.
Wow. Okay. So even late years of high school, you were going to that Bible study and getting.
I don't quote me.
Okay.
Even though I'm saying that right now, I don't remember when the years were. I don't remember. I could not tell you what year I first went to Westwood.
But you went through most of college kind of
Oh,
still.
I went through college. I was already wanting to be a Rushdoonyite, and I didn't want to go to college. Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah, right.
Okay.
So it
Okay.
must have been sometime in high school.
Okay. So then after USC, didn't you go to law school after that?
Right. Well, it was a wannabe law school. They were trying to become a law school, and
Okay.
it eventually went belly up. But it was called Simon Greenleaf School of Law. Greenleaf was the co-founder of the Harvard Law School, and it was run by John Warwick Montgomery, who was a good scholar. He was not a presuppositionalist, to put it mildly. If you look at the Festschrift for Van Til called Jerusalem and Athens, he's got an article in there called Once Upon an A Priori. and he tries to dismantle Van Til's presuppositional apologetic from an evidentialist apologetic framework. And he's a clever guy, Montgomery. He's clever. He's witty. He's a fun guy, but he didn't take Van Til seriously, so his article wasn't really worth taking seriously either. But anyway, he tried to integrate law and theology, which is a good thing to do. That was a kind of a Rushdoony-ish thing to do, to Christianize law and government. So he had a good project going on there, and it worked for a few years. He started out in Chuck Smith's Calvary Chapel in Costa Mesa. That's where the classes met. And in California, you did not have to go to an accredited law school to take the bar exam. If you studied with a judge or you studied with an attorney and they made you read cases, and then you take what's called the first year law students exam, also called the baby bar. And then if you pass that, then you could continue studying for 3 more years and then take the bar exam, even though you're not going to an accredited law school. That's what this was.
Like plumbers and electricians can go through like a
An
master
apprenticeship.
plumber.
I don't know. I don't know what kind of course or I'm sorry, what kind of exam a plumber has to have before he gets licensed. I don't know what kind of exams they have, but apprenticeship model. That's sort of what we're talking about here. And that's the way lawyers used to be, apprentice system.
Okay. Wow. Okay, so that's a lot. So then after USC, you were going to Simon Greenleaf for how many
4
years?
years. 4 years.
4 years.
An accredited law school is 3, but if you go the unaccredited route, you have to go for 1 year, take the baby bar, and then go 3 more years.
What was your intent? What was your purpose for doing that? Your reason?
Well, let's see. That's an interesting question. I think the main reason was when I got involved with the Rushdoony people, Mike Wrench, and then I also met the Wilson family, who were original investors in the land ideas that Chalcedon was promoting in the 60s and 70s. That's a whole long story on that one. But anyway, hardcore Rushdoony guys, I would call them. But they ran a Christian school, and I got involved with another secular organization. And through this secular homeschooling organization, I went to court with some of their clients who were being persecuted by the state for being truant, from the public school system. They were educating their kids at home. And the courts it was illegal in California at this time to do homeschooling unless you had certain accreditation and certain paths to safety. You could be anyway. I went to court cases in downtown LA where the state was threatening to take kids away from their parents because they were being homeschooled, even though the evidence showed the kids were very responsible, very able to relate to adults, very well socialized, and 2 or 3 grade levels ahead of their public school counterparts. So it was a complete success, but it was illegal, and the court was going to take the kids away. So I said, I want to be a lawyer to be able to help kids who are being threatened by the state.
Yeah.
So that's why I went to law school.
Wow. Okay, so you went through law school 4 years, and then
Let me tell another story about law school.
yeah. Okay.
What Montgomery did in his school was he said it was classes were 4 nights a week, but he said if you wanted to, you could take an extra night of classes, and when you get your JD degree, you would also get a master's degree. So I took that option and went the extra 5. I went through 5 days a week. And at the end of the year, at the end of the 4 years, I wrote a thesis, which was basically a biblical defense of anarchism. Now, the claim that Montgomery made for his school was that it integrated law and theology. So they didn't want people who were just into theology. They wanted them to understand the law to some degree. And they didn't want lawyers who were just secular lawyers. They wanted lawyers with a biblical framework, a biblical counterpart, or whatever you would call it. So when it came to defending, and one of the things I liked about the school, and the reason I went to this school, rather than, I think at the same time I was thinking about going through Bill Gothard's law school, which I think is called Oak Brook or something like that law school. And it's the same format. It's an unaccredited law school. But I liked the idea. Montgomery said, when you do a master's thesis, you have to do what he called a European style. Montgomery's big on Europe. He's big on Strasbourg, where they have a human rights institute and stuff like that. But anyway, he said, we want to have you undergo a European style thesis defense, which is a public event. In other words, it's not just sitting before three professors who are on your thesis committee, but you have a public defense where the whole public comes in, the general public, and they watch the debate. They watch the grilling of the prospective degree winner by the committee. So I said, that sounds like fun. I want to have a public defense of anarchism.
Wow, yeah, that'd be.
So that's what enticed me to sign up for Montgomery's, was that public defense of a thesis. And I knew I wanted to do a biblical thesis on anarchism.
Did,
The problem is,
yeah.
it's funny because he did promise that, we're going to have the integration of law and theology. That's what he wanted in his school. So I went to the master's side. The master's side was more theological. The master's side of the program was theological, and the other side obviously was the law side. So I said, here's my thesis. I want to do a biblical defense of anarchism, a biblical attack on the whole concept of the state. And all the master's instructors said, well, I don't think, I had a couple of people I had picked out, as I thought this guy would be a helpful thesis advisor for my thesis. But they all declined. They said, well, I really don't understand the biblical. I don't understand the anarchist side. I don't feel I would be qualified to be your thesis advisor on an anarchist. I don't get that anarchism. I'm not very well instructed. I don't really understand the anarchism stuff. Try to find someone else. And excuse me. On the legal side, nobody really felt like they understood the Bible. It's a biblical defense of anarchism, and I'm going through the Bible to try to show how the Bible promotes anarchism. And all the legal guys said, I'm really not your guy because I don't really know that much about the Bible. So he's trying to integrate law and theology, but he never did really get it that good a job. Finally, I got Harold. Oh no, I'm going to forget his name. He wrote a book called Harold Lindsell. He was a Fuller professor at one time, I think, and he wrote a book called The Battle for the Bible, which is a good, decent book on defending the Bible and inerrancy and stuff like that. And he agreed to be my thesis advisor. And so this is great because he was like a name brand. He was better than some of the other guys, but he was good. But I think he thought he would be able to tear my thesis apart. I think that's what he thought. Because it's obvious you just say Romans 13 and you're toast. That's what he thought he was going to do.
Right.
But then unfortunately, he had a stroke in his right eye
What?
and he wasn't able to read my thesis. And so he was
No.
be able to be my advisor. And
Oh
so I
no.
never did get my public defense of anarchism because the
No.
school folded up before I was able to do that. So that's funny.
Man, so what did you end up doing instead?
Instead of a thesis defense,
Yeah, did you what if that was what you were supposed to do, did you have to pick something else or do a
I
different?
never did get a thesis defense. The school kind of folded. There was all kinds of various
Oh,
problems. We don't need to get into all their
okay.
problems, but the school went out of business before I was able to do. I had already I don't remember if I'd already passed the bar by then or not, but the school went belly up. It went out of business.
Simon Greenleaf. How long was that in or going on for a decade or something maybe or
Yeah, better part of a decade, I'd say. I don't
okay.
remember when they started. As I said, I know that their first classes were in Chuck Smith's church in Calvary Chapel, Costa Mesa. Then
Yeah.
they moved to a Lutheran church. Montgomery had Lutheran roots. So he found a Lutheran church in Orange, California, where we held, that's where I met with a judge and an attorney, and that's where we had class, so to speak. Basically, it was judges and attorneys who wanted to volunteer for this project. They knew Montgomery. They wanted to see the integration of law and Christianity. And so they were helping by basically going through cases like they would in a law school with the students. And there may be, I don't know, 20 students. I don't know how many there were.
Okay. That sounds pretty neat. Like I like this. It sounds very grassroots kind
It's
of.
good. It's
Yeah,
good.
it
Yeah,
sounds
it's a
like a
good thing.
neat model and people with really good intent and
Oh, yeah. And that's where I became involved in a group called the Christian Conciliation Service. One of the professors there was on the board of directors of this organization called Christian Conciliation Service, which is a 1 Corinthians 6 organization where they try to get Christians to resolve their disputes in the church rather than in before secular courts, which is what 1 Corinthians 6 says to do. So that was a good thing. I worked there, worked for them on a volunteer basis. I also took classes at Pepperdine and with another group, can't remember the name of the group. It was a Catholic group, and they were trying to resolve disputes, a conciliation type group. So, and I guess you could say I became a trained mediator, eventually served on the board of directors of Christian Conciliation Service. So that was a great thing.
That's neat.
Yeah.
So it'd be cool if this podcast somehow turned into your thesis, your public thesis, getting to
Getting
demonstrate
to
to the
defend my
world
thesis
to
publicly, that'd be
defend
great. That's fine.
biblical anarchism.
You know what the thesis was basically was my so-called 95 theses on the state. That's basically what it was. I mean,
Yeah.
I organized it differently, but I organized it into what I can't remember, 7 chapters. I think that thing is organized into 7 sections, 7 time periods. And then, each time period I'd go through 3 or 4 theses, and it's basically in biblical chronological order.
That's
So
awesome.
that's what my thesis was.
So yeah, because you developed the 95 Theses more after that on biblical anarchism, 95 Theses, right? And so
I
that
didn't develop the theses. The theses are the same as they were originally,
oh wow, do you still
but I
have
just I just had more content. Haven't you ever seen that 95 theses
yeah,
thing?
online? Is that so
Right,
essentially is that
right,
okay.
right.
That's so,
There's
so
if
neat.
you dig, it's buried under all kinds of links. I don't know where it is, but there's a thesis folder that has my thesis in it, but I never got to defend it.
I need to like catalog all your links. I they're all spread out all over the
Oh
place.
yeah, it's crazy.
Yeah, yeah. Um, good. So, wow, there's so much there. So, can you talk a little bit more about, do you want to get into your issue with the Supreme Court at all?
Okay, I knew this was coming even in law school, but basically, here's the story. In 1892, the U.S. Supreme Court proudly boasted that America was a Christian nation. And half of the court's opinion was a history of the United States going back to Columbus and showing how America was a Christian nation. And the reason that came up was because a church, I think in New York, called the Church of the Holy Trinity, wanted to hire a pastor from Britain to be the pastor of their church in New York. And some customs and immigration meddler with the government said, oh, you can't do that because we have a law against foreign imported labor. Now, the law was originally written to keep people from bringing boatloads of Chinamen over to work on the railroads and stuff like that. It had nothing to do with churches. But anyway, they went to court, and the Supreme Court said basically the immigration people were nuts because that's not what this law was about. But even if it was about that, even if the law was intended to prevent a church in New York from hiring a pastor from another country, we would know that that law was unconstitutional because this is a Christian nation and churches have the freedom to hire whatever pastor they want.
Right.
So then the court went into a big long lecture on how this is a Christian nation, starting with Columbus and going through the Constitution and everything like that. Well, that case came up again when a man from Canada wanted to teach at the Yale Divinity School. So you can see the parallel there. But here you have a man from another country who wants to engage in a kind of a religious teaching position, just
Yeah.
like the church had a pastor. The Yale Divinity School wants a student,
Yeah.
and the government said, "Oh, you can't do that because you have to." I think he wanted to become a citizen. The Canadian wanted to become a citizen, and he was willing to take the oath of allegiance that every naturalized citizen had to take,
Okay.
but he was a pacifist, and he didn't want to fight in any war. So, and I think one of the things an immigrant has to say to become a naturalized citizen is, I will defend my country, which means I'll go in the military if I'm called to do so.
Wow.
And so he said, I don't want to do that. And the government said, well, then you can't become an American. You can't become a naturalized American citizen. And so you can't get your job at the Yale Divinity School. And that went to the Supreme Court. And the Supreme Court, whoever was defending this Canadian guy, brought up the Holy Trinity case from 1892 and said, this case shows that it's a Christian nation and you can't discriminate against people if they have Christian basis or Christian beliefs, which is what the government was doing in this guy's case. And the court ruled in the Canadian case, it mentioned the Holy Trinity case, but says, but the government has a duty to survive. And that's more important than obeying God and being a Christian nation. And so anybody who wants to be a naturalized American citizen, their allegiance to the government has to be unqualified. You can't say, I will obey the government unless the government orders me to sin, because my ultimate allegiance is to God. You can't say that. Your allegiance to the government has to be unqualified. It can't be qualified by a higher allegiance. God is, in this respect, a foreign power. It was what the United States was saying. And based on that case, a guy in Illinois who passed the Illinois bar exam and wanted to be an attorney, but he said, I'm a pacifist, so I'm not going to engage in violence. I'm not going to do a war thing or anything like that. And the state bar said, well, then you can't be an attorney because attorneys use violence against to defend their client. And you can dispute that reasoning if you want, but they basically said you can't become an attorney because you don't believe in violence. And they quoted the case with the Canadian. And that the case, is good law today. I mean, it's not quoted very often, but it still stands. So basically, a federal court in Los Angeles told me that based on that case, the Illinois law student, I was barred from taking from becoming an attorney, from taking the oath to support the Constitution and becoming an attorney. So
So you had passed the bar exam, and it just
right.
and now
I
and
will.
now what you're
Every
like,
attorney has to take an oath to support the Constitution. And it's phrased in different ways in different states, but basically that's what it is. But the case in Illinois said you cannot take that oath to support the Constitution because you don't really support the Constitution, you support God. And the only reason you obey the government is because God tells you to, not because the government tells you to. I mean, that's good logic, actually. If you don't have a Christian nation anymore, that's good logic. Your ultimate allegiance is to God and not the government. And the courts have said that that won't fly. If you want to take an oath, if you want to become an officer of the court, if you want to become a government employee, and there are lots of cases. We had a case in San Diego of somebody who was working with the engineering department in the city of San Diego or the county of San Diego, and they required him to take an oath. A lot of government positions require people to take an oath to support the government. And the court said, well, you're a Christian, so your ultimate allegiance is to God, not the government. So you can't have this job anymore. And even a certified elevator inspector has to take an oath to support the Constitution, because the elevators are how the first responders get up to the top floors on 9/11. So it's a national security issue. So anything that can possibly be a national security issue, you have to take an oath to support the Constitution. And of course, there's lots of immigration cases where people who come from other countries want to become American citizens. They have to take an oath to support the Constitution. But if some immigration official finds out that their ultimate allegiance is to the Bible rather than the government, they won't let them become a naturalized citizen.
so you're saying
So,
that those oaths, no matter what state you're in,
right,
basically is saying you have to have unqualified allegiance to the government over any other thing before
over God,
over
over even God. Yep,
it says that?
yep. Well, that's what the courts have said.
Okay.
The courts have said if your allegiance to the God trumps your allegiance to the government. In other words, no matter how many cases, no matter how many occasions you would obey the government, if the government says we want you to kill your neighbor because he's a Muslim or whatever, kill him because he's a homosexual, and you say, I don't believe in killing people, so I have to disobey the government. The courts have said, well, then you can't take the oath to support the Constitution because you don't really support the Constitution, you support God. It's really pretty obvious. That's what the courts have said.
Yeah. Okay. So then you knew about how long did
I
you know?
knew this before. Well, because for one reason, I knew about the Holy Trinity case in 1892. I don't know whether I learned about that in law school or from somewhere else, but
Uh-huh.
that's a pretty important case where the Supreme Court proudly says we are a Christian nation, and they go through all these hoops to try to prove that we're a Christian nation. That's a very interesting case just to read about it, and it's a significant case because it was basically thrown out in the 20th century. So,
So
and one
that
of the things a lawyer has to know how to do is to find out whether a given case is still good law or whether it's been overruled. And so there are basic, principles or protocols that you follow to find that out. And so I followed those basic law school principles to find out if this case was still good law and found out it had been basically thrown out. So I knew that there's, and I read those cases, and that nobody in my law school knew about these cases as far as I knew. I mean, a couple of people knew about the Holy Trinity case, but they didn't know how it had been used in subsequent cases involving a law student. So, so anyway,
Is that something that came up in discuss that you brought up then in discussion? Because I mean,
I
you're
only brought it up because a couple of the law professors had First Amendment organizations. Like, for example, if you know about the Rutherford Institution under John Whitehead, um, they defend people who are being persecuted by the government for religious reasons. And so I talked to a number of people who have these organizations. I said, here's my case. I want to become a lawyer. The government won't let me. Will you defend me? And they all said, no, because you're an anarchist. They didn't want to defend an anarchist. So it had come up with some people at the law school, but it had never been a part of a class or anything like that.
okay.
And
Okay. And so that came up with the Supreme Court. You took that, or did you take that all the way to the Supreme
I
Court?
took it all the way to the Supreme Court through California, to the California State Supreme Court. Under the Constitution, you can appeal directly to the Supreme Court from the California State Supreme Court.
Okay.
So the California State Supreme Court has original jurisdiction over matters relating to bar admission. So I had to go to the state Supreme Court first. And then after I went to the US Supreme Court, I went back to federal court and tried to run the case through the federal courts instead of going through state courts. And in federal court, I had an amazing legal team. I think it was through my Christian conciliation connections. I can't remember, but I met a guy named Ed Gaffney who taught at Valparaiso Law School in Indiana. He was a professor of constitutional law. I think he and another guy were the authors of what's called the Religious Freedom Restoration Act of I think it was 1991. Anyway, he was a good professor of law, and I had another, Doug Laycock, I think was the other guy. These were the authors of, and it was signed by Bill Clinton. So that puts it in the 90s. That was signed by Bill Clinton. Very, very important law that was passed by Congress, which tried to enshrine religious freedom in the law to make sure that courts can't destroy it. But they did anyway, eventually. But that's another story. So anyway, I had Ed Gaffney, Doug Laycock, and also I had Erwin Chemerinsky, who at that time was professor of law at USC Law School. He then went on to become the dean of the law school at UC Irvine. And then from there, he became the dean of the law school at Berkeley. So he was on my dream team. And then I also had, this is crazy that I would forget his name, but he was on the California State Supreme Court, a state Supreme Court justice, which is good because, as I said, the state Supreme Court has original jurisdiction over bar admissions. Why can't I remember his name? He was one of three judges who were voted off the court by California voters, along with a Supreme Court justice named Rose Bird. And basically it was because they all opposed capital punishment and they were considered liberals. So they had a referendum, and this was like the first time I know of where voters tossed Supreme Court judges off the state Supreme Court.
Wow.
I can't remember his name. That's embarrassing.
I'm impressed you can remember all the names that you do. You're just pulling these things out. That's impressive.
If you were to give me a multiple choice on his name, I know I'd remember. If you gave me
Yeah,
all
right.
three justices, I would know which one was on my.
Okay, so you had this team, then what happened from there?
Well, basically, we went to the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals in California, and on a kind of a technicality, they didn't really get to the issues. They didn't really get to the First Amendment. They didn't get any of these issues. But on a technicality, they said that my case couldn't be appealed from the district court. And it would be just, I couldn't even explain to you. And
Okay.
you wouldn't be interested in it, but it was a technicality.
But what was your plan? Were you just going to try to appeal back to the 1892 decision? I mean, it had already been kind of.
Well, I'm appealing to the First Amendment. How can you have a First Amendment that talks about religious freedom if a Christian can't take an oath to support the Constitution and become a lawyer or a draftsman for the county of San Diego or a naturalized American citizen? I mean, this is like really crazy that there's all these cases of people who are not allowed to become Americans or to get a job if they have to take an oath to support the Constitution because they're Christian. because their allegiance to God trumps their allegiance to the government. That's nuts. And so it's a basic First Amendment issue. If you read, for example, the dissenting opinion in the case from Illinois, it's great. It was a dissenting opinion, which means he was the minority and he was losing, but it's a great defense from the First Amendment. So I'm just saying, hey, doesn't the First Amendment give a Christian the right to take an oath and become an attorney? They never discussed that issue, never, ever, ever in the whole thing. They just said that was just one legal excuse after another for not even asking the question.
Wow. So you were ready to go, and then they threw it out on based upon a technicality,
Yeah,
essentially.
technicality.
So stupid.
Shucks, I'm forgetting that Ed Gaffney said, we don't think that this narrow, they dropped it down to a very narrow legal issue. And they said that it couldn't be appealed. The Supreme Court wouldn't hear it. And so it wouldn't be it would be a waste of legal resources for us to appeal the Ninth Circuit to the U.S. Supreme Court, because when you file an appeal with the U.S. Supreme Court, you have to have like 60 copies of your brief, 60. And these briefs have to be meticulously printed and cut to a bizarre size. It's not like 8 by 5 or 9 by 12 or anything like that. It's like 8 7/8 by 6 by 1/14 or something like crazy measurements. And you have to really work on it. And I worked crazy to get these things all printed up, and I made Kinkos go through all kinds of hoops to get these printed the right way. They finally accepted it. But anyway, Gaffney said it would be he couldn't do it in good conscience as a lawyer, because it would be wasting the court's resources, because he know it's not going to go anywhere. And I knew that too. So I couldn't disagree with him, but I had to just file it myself and get turned down. So
Well, it's an incredible story. I applaud you for trying. That's an incredible drive to and re
well, incredibly futile, that's for sure.
No, but it's not a waste. It's
You know what? I don't know how 60 copies. Yeah, and that presumes that maybe 60 people somewhere in the Supreme Court, all those clerks and staffers they have are, reading before the Supreme Court justice reads a brief. A lot of other people below the justice reads the brief and says, okay, this is worth your time to read. This is, they don't, the justices don't decide as
yeah.
much as the clerks decide what case is going to be heard. And everybody knew that this case was not going to be heard, because it's not a case. The court, maybe they get 4,000 appeals a year, and they
Yeah.
only take like a couple of hundred cases that
Yeah.
they're even going to hear, they're even going to pay attention to. And
Okay.
they take those cases based on the fact that they want to advance a certain position. They think there's an important legal question that needs to be answered, because maybe there's a conflict between two states or something, but there's an important legal principle they want to advance. Maybe they want to legalize homosexual marriages or something, but that's because they think this is an important thing for the court to do. My case, wasn't even on their radar. They don't care about this case. They don't want to mess with this. And
From
they
my
certainly don't
perspective,
want.
it seems like a very important case.
Well,
Obviously, it
it's
is.
only if you're a budding theocrat and you want America to become a Christian nation again, and they didn't want to do that. They
Yeah.
don't want to promote Christianity, so they didn't nothing.
Okay. Okay. So you finally dropped all that. This was after your time at Simon Greenfield, right? That all this
Greenleaf.
Simon Greenleaf. This
Green,
all took place within the next couple years,
yeah.
and then
Now at that time, while I was litigating my case, I was joining the Catholic Worker. So there's another avenue that we could explore.
okay. Okay. Well, let's
I
maybe.
don't know if you wanted to go there right now, but that's what's happening. At the same time I'm litigating, I'm joining the Catholic Worker.
Okay, well, we're gonna wrap this up. Okay, you're about to join the Catholic Worker, and then are you still working with Rushdoony? Like, are you still underneath Rushdoony at this during any of this, or what's?
Yeah, I think I'm still, no, maybe not. No, I guess I wasn't.
Were you
I
writing
think
for Chalcedon?
well, no, I wasn't writing for Chalcedon anymore. That was, in fact, that was a few years out. My last, I was out of Chalcedon by 1982, I would say, 1982, because in 82, Gary North published my article called Social Apologetics in the first volume of a series journal that he had hoped to move forward on called Christianity and Civilization. And that's because Gary North got fired as the editor of the Journal of Christian Reconstruction by Rushdoony. And that article I had submitted to Rushdoony for publication in the Journal of Christian Reconstruction, but Rushdoony rejected it. Gary North took it with him to Tyler, Texas, and published it. So, I mean, Gary North and I were out of Chalcedon by 81.
Can you just speak on like why? I mean, this is probably a huge thing to open up, but on why did he do that? Why did Rushdoony? He didn't have any beef with you. Why would he?
I don't know if he
Why
had
did
a
you get
beef with me or
included
not. I
in?
don't know. I don't know. I don't know what Rushdoony and I didn't talk that much. And I don't know. I know I've heard the reason why he didn't like my article was because I criticized, I'm sorry, I'm not good with names. I can't remember names. Doug, if you heard it to me, it's on the tip of my tongue. Anyway, he wrote a book about First Amendment issues, and I basically said he wasn't a consistent Van Tillian or something like that, as a picky point. And Rushdoony didn't want to publish the article because he was a friend of Chalcedon, and he didn't want me criticizing friends of Chalcedon. So okay, I get that. But anyway, and
Yeah.
yeah.
North, you, Chilton, several guys. Is that when Chalcedon basically split up altogether, or is
It's
Chalcedon
all
still in?
complicated. It's all complicated, and I don't know how much the issues were related.
Yeah.
David Chilton was under a contract with Chalcedon, and I was simply paid $50 per article. I wasn't under a contract.
Okay.
And one of the parts of David Chilton's contract, as I understand it, I've never seen the contract. I don't know if anything was even written, but there was an expectation that Chilton would get a PhD. Rushdoony wanted his staff to have advanced degrees.
Gotcha.
And Chilton and I both saw that as completely inconsistent, given all the forceful critique that Rushdoony made of secular universities. But he still wanted us to have, as I said, he said, the union card. He wanted us to have that credential.
Gotcha.
Now, I wasn't under any obligation to get that credential, but maybe he expected me to. I don't know. But David, that expectation was very clear.
Okay.
And David didn't want to get the PhD. I mean, maybe he started it, but it just like, I don't know, how can you do something which you're so not motivated to do? So I think eventually Rushdoony got fed up with both of us for different reasons, more for Chilton than I think for me, but still, he basically cut off Orange County. All the meetings he had in Orange County, he would just cut them off. And I think he said that, I'm just cutting off Orange County. And I don't know how much that was Chilton's fault, how much was my fault. But anyway, that was, I guess, sometime in 81. And we were both fired. We were both called Chalcedon scholars, but we were both fired from that. And so, and Gary North's problem with Rushdoony was even more complicated, but that's a big old long story.
All right. Well, let's pause there. And next time, I want to kind of start there and pick back up with you and Chilton and your relationship with Rushdoony, all of that, and then we'll eventually get into some more of North, and then eventually Bonson and all of that story. So this is really good stuff, Kevin, and I'm thankful that we can kind of just address Vine and Fig Tree, but also get into your world a little bit. The man who's really put this content together, one who's been advocating for a stateless anarcho-capitalist society for years. It's amazing that you came to those realizations that early. I'm kind of blown away that even in like college you were writing on this. That's some really intentional living there.
We didn't say anything about the class I had with John Hospers, who was the Libertarian Party candidate for president in 1972. He was a teacher at USC, a professor.
So you had that class in college and you
Yeah.
were influenced a
Well,
lot.
no, I was an anarchist before I took that class. Hospers was a minarchist. Hospers believed in a minimal state. He was a libertarian. He wrote a book called Libertarianism, which is a good book. I don't even know if it's in print anymore, but a good book. And in his class, that was one of the texts, but he also, I think, a recommended text or an important text was Murray Rothbard's book, For a New Liberty.
Yes.
So I had already become very anti-state because of Rushdoony. Rushdoony is very anti-state.
Yeah.
He just because of Romans 13, he would never say I'm an anarchist. He would never ever say I'm an anarchist. But anyway,
Okay, so let's say the yeah,
Rothbard gave me permission to say I'm an anarchist. Rothbard came out and said I'm an anarchist. So I
right.
said, Rothbard can say that, I can say that too, because that was a good fit for what I was.
Let's get back into Hosberg and then Rothbard. All of this is so good. This is so great. So thanks for tuning in, and I'm thankful that we get to talk to Kevin Craig today about Vine and Fig Tree and what it's going to be like living one day in a stateless society. And so let's keep advocating for a Vine and Fig Tree worldview as presented in Micah chapter 4. You have anything,
Thanks, Dan.
any final thoughts, Kevin?
Now but my final thought is I'd rather talk about Vine and Fig Tree than biography, but we'll get there eventually.
It's all good, and you're a fascinating person, even though you don't think so. And so the stories are great. So thanks for contributing today. Talk to
All
you
right,
later.
thank you.
All right, bye bye.
Bye.